My friends, hello. By popular demand, the car is back for this video. So it's not a German car. Here we're in a tin can. I don't know how old it is, but it's a real antique. Anyway, today we're going to talk about Marxism. Last time I emphasized the need for a revolution. In other words, my friends, if you look, the system is collapsing. This is not a system that needs a makeover, that needs a minor reform. No, it's really a system that is collapsing. But anyway, the good news is that all the old systems, feudalism, slavery, other systems, have collapsed. There's no reason for this one to last forever. So there you go. Now, there's something very important. When I explained last time in the last video a little bit about what we're going through, there might be a point that I didn't emphasize as much as it deserves. You see, each of us looks at the problems in our life or the problem we're facing from our own personal perspective. One person thinks that healthcare has collapsed. Another is against the educational system. There's another who finds that inflation is becoming unbearable. There's another who has a problem finding a job, and so on and so forth. And each person sees their problem as if it were a unique problem, potentially disconnected from everything else, whereas in reality, everything is connected to everything. And what we see today is the result of a system. Without reforming the system, we won't solve these problems. We can always try to tackle them individually, looking at life through a narrow lens and trying to ignore everything else. But we won't get very far. So, in the last video, I talked about rampant privatization, where we have very important needs, essential human needs like water, for example, running water, that are being privatized. And that means it's bought up later by financial groups, by trading groups, often international stateless groups who don't necessarily have the public's interests at heart, who don't operate with a public service mindset, but rather with a logic of commodification. Everything is a commodity, everything must be sold, everything must be negotiated, and everything must be opened up to competition. So with this, we'll end up with our basic needs being held hostage by certain forces, the forces of money, right? And then we are forced to pay them rent. So our basic needs are turned into rents. And of course, we can't say no. We can't refuse, we can't push them away because simply we don't have a choice. Once again, these are basic needs. In the United Kingdom, they're selling medical practices. You go to the medical practice, you'll see that your medical practice is now part of the so-and-so group. And you look, well, it's an American company owned by financial groups which has bought thousands of doctors and dentists' offices, all of that, and which turns our healthcare into profit, and so on. Privatization can go very far. I'll give you an example, maybe a controversial one, right? But you'll see that privatization goes extremely far. Let me tell you. Let's take, for example, the French law on secularism, the law that established the dismantling of the church in France. It's a law, you could say, well, listen, from your Marxist perspective, it's a law. It has nothing to do with Marxism in a way. You can't interpret it from a capitalistic angle. Well, actually, yes, you can. Let me explain. By destroying France, which was the eldest daughter of the church, by destroying the Christian religion, what was the goal for France, really, from a capitalist perspective? Well, it was to put religion in competition with other religions. It was to open the religious field to competition. Quite simply, at first, you can see it's a bit like the water company. At the beginning, you have a general water utility. Then you have 50 companies competing with each other. It's the same for religion. You had a religion that was technically a state religion. Technically, it was a religion that had a monopoly over religious practice and space in France. And in all Western countries, by the way, it was the same. And what did we do? We dismantled this religion to put it in competition with other religions that came to express themselves in the same territory. So we're clearly in a logic of competition, of a market economy applied to religion. And in the same way, we're going to apply the market economy to language, the French language, which is now in competition, in rivalry in France with other languages. So from time to time, there are patches that are put in place, but it doesn't change anything. When, for example, there's a French law that requires radio stations to play a certain percentage of French songs. Well, it's someone somewhere who wanted to put on their patch, but you can clearly see that in the grand scheme of things, it won't change anything. So you have that at the cultural level. You also have culture becoming a market in the sense that, again, it becomes open to competition. The language, as I was saying, the French language is no longer really the language of France, but there are so many languages that can claim the linguistic space. And eventually you can also have that for traditions, for customs, for ways of life. And then in the end, you can even have that for national identity. That means what we're going to do. We have a national identity that monopolizes the space. Well, what do? We're going to open it up to competition. So we're going to break the national identity and allow other identities to come and express themselves. Then we allow the laws or mechanisms of the market to operate. You can see that what I'm denouncing actually applies at all levels, at every scale. You're going to have this level. So now let's maybe get back to our story. Karl Marx was born in 1818, roughly 18. Let's say at the beginning of the 1800s, I'd say 1818, but well, I'm within plus or minus 5 years. So he died at the end around 1880 and some change, right? So he lived during the 1800s. Where did he live? In the United Kingdom. Originally, he was German. He was born on the border between France and Germany, and then later he was expelled. He's an authentic philosophy professor by training. He went to live in the United Kingdom. So I challenge anyone to go live in the United Kingdom and not develop a Marxist critique of capitalism. I mean, I want to tell you that it was in London that Karl Marx became a Marxist because it was a country that really instrumentalized, that pushed it to its quintessence. The society of, what would I call it? I would say it's a predatory society, a society where the strongest crushes the weakest. Let me give you something. Just an example where the system is designed to crush you. Let me give you a simple example. In the United Kingdom, today you have what is called the council tax. You can call it that. It's a local tax. All right? It's a local tax. They calculate it for you every year. They send it to you. Okay? It depends on the value, actually the value of the home you live in. It doesn't depend on your income. And they've always done it this way. It's always been more or less like that. At one time, the British would close windows or make ugly houses or houses without a view on purpose to lower the value of their property and reduce local taxes. It could go very far. So I was telling you that, for example, it's divided into 10 monthly payments. So the annual payment is split into 10 installments. For 10 months you pay, then for 2 months you don't pay. So imagine that. They created a system, and you can see that it's really sick minds, really twisted minds who come up with this. Well, if someone misses some payments, let's say someone pays late, and then later he pays on the 15th of the month, and then 2 or 3 months later he has another payment issue. Then he pays late again 2 or 3 times. What do? Now we're going to demand the full amount. We're now asking him to pay for the entire year upfront. See, what kind of mindset is that? Actually, it's the same minds who designed those benches in parks and then put spikes or devices to stop homeless people from sleeping on them. These are people who have developed a taste for hunting humans, a taste for preying on humans. It's literally cannibalism. Humans have always been revolted by cannibalism. I said it. And actually, they really did it. They really turned it into a cult. So you have someone who has an incident in their life, who has money problems in their life, who can't pay. So what do? You're going to raise the bar even higher to push them even further into financial distress, to crush them even more. And you can see that with this kind of mentality, which is practically present at every level in everything you interact with. You'll see that. You understand that Karl Marx became a Marxist or became a Marxist in the United Kingdom. So let me tell you about that. His critique of capitalism was formulated in a book called Critique of Political Economy. We know it by the name Capital. And this book, part of which was published posthumously, well, it changed, if you will. It changed. It changed enormously. It had an influence, I would say. I have to turn to books like the Bible or books like that to find books that have had as much impact on so many people. And this one in an extremely short amount of time, considering the book was written about 150 years ago. So, as I was saying, in this critique, he will make a number of observations. He won't give any solutions, of course. Karl Marx doesn't give solutions. Karl Marx doesn't write a book about communism or socialism. He doesn't say you have to do this or that, even though he wrote other books besides Capital. But he's not, he's not someone who comes with solutions or recipes. The solutions were later imagined by others who came in the following century or later. He was already dead when these people arrived. They said, well, we understand Karl Marx's criticisms. And then for us, the solution is this or that. And each person came with their own solutions, but Karl Marx isn't responsible for that. He was already dead when people came up with alternative solutions to capitalism. Okay, so how did he see things? Well, he saw it like this. He saw that in the world today, in his time, but today it's the same, it hasn't changed. We have what is called the proletariat. The proletariat are people, it's you and me really. The proletariat are people who work to earn their living. It's maybe, let's say, the opposite of a rentier. The proletarian is someone who does not own the means of production. Because if you look at the evolution, how the production society has evolved, well, at some point we had a situation, and especially since 1760, with the arrival of the Industrial Revolution, where production, if you will, became concentrated in places of production. That means offices, factories, workshops, and with which or against which the individual really has no way to compete. An individual doesn't have the ability to compete with a large factory. It's like, for example, when a supermarket opens. Can the guy who owns a grocery store or the butcher or the baker stand up to this giant? No, he can't. So what path can he take? It's to go work for them. There's a very interesting movie. It was Les Charlots, if I remember correctly. Yes, it was Les Charlots, where we have Galabru who runs a grocery store. No, it's not a grocery store. Yes, it's a grocery store, a bar, all that. And actually, across from him, a big supermarket is going to open. And actually, what's going to happen is that this will destroy all the businesses in the city. And the shopkeepers, when they go to complain to Michel Serrault, who was the manager of the supermarket, he'll tell them, listen, I'll hire you. As a butcher, how much do you make? I'll hire you to run my butcher shop. What about you? What do you do? You're the cafe owner. You'll run the supermarket cafe. Actually, what's happening, if you will, and we've seen this acceleration in our lifetime. It started in the time of Karl Marx, but today we see it more and more. That is, what do we see? We actually see that a tiny part of the population, a tiny part, let's say, call them what you want. He calls them the bourgeoisie. We can call them the forces of money or the oligarchy. Call them whatever you want, the top few or any name. Well, those people will own and monopolize the means of production and subsistence. That means they will monopolize everything, all the tools in society. And in fact, everyone else in the world is forced to work for them. So we have the proletariat. These are people who will be forced to go and sell their time. The proletarian exists as long as he can sell his time, and the day he's no longer needed, he's tossed aside. By the way, in Capital, there's a very interesting comparison between the slave and the proletarian. The slave could have an advantage, possibly bringing us back to the earlier logic about opening up to competition, if you will, the slave. Chronologically speaking, is a less evolved social construct than the proletarian, because the proletarian comes after, chronologically speaking. Except that the slave had advantages compared to the proletarian in the sense that the slave was owned by a single master and his work was guaranteed. The proletarian, in the end, what did we do? The proletarian is simply the opening of labor to competition. That means slavery was opened up to competition. That means the slave is now forced to run from master to master, looking for places where he can sell his labor, where he can sell his time, where he can sell his energy, in order to access the means of subsistence, in order to make a living. You see what I mean? So that's kind of the idea. Now, when you look further, you'll see that the proletarian doesn't depend on the wage. That means it's not, when we say proletarian, we always think of someone who makes a poor living or who is paid by the day or something like that. No, that's not necessarily the case. Even if you are, I don't know, let's say you're a cashier at Societe Generale and you earn a good salary, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 times the minimum wage, you're still a proletarian. Why? Because being a proletarian is not a question of income, it's a question of coercion, it's a question of being forced to work. That means even if you earn 4 or 5 times the minimum wage, as long as you are forced to go work for someone else, you are a proletarian. Even if we might say that some people are better off than others. Now, the reality is that in the Marxist definition holds something important. It's that commodities, any commodity, when subjected to competition, see their price drop so that in general they end up not even reaching the cost price. That means that, for example, we have 10 producers who produce corn. Well, they will undercut each other year after year after year until the point where there are practically no more profits. You see that, for example, I don't know, you see that on eBay, you see that on Amazon. FBA sellers, for example, all those people who sell on Amazon, who sell on eBay, how do they do it? They are always competing with each other. So they say to themselves, okay, I have a 20% margin, maybe I'll go down to 19, that way I sell better than the other guy. The other guy will say, oh, it's going down, well, I'll take an 18% margin, then it drops. And in extreme cases, you even end up with people selling at a loss. That is, people selling with negative margins, hoping to be able to, that the customer stays with them or that they somehow manage to survive. But there are a lot of people who sell at a loss. So in the Marxist definition, labor is a commodity and it follows the same rules as commodities like corn or wheat grains, for example. So it ends up in a society like this, it ends up decreasing, its value ends up decreasing until it reaches its cost price. That means in the end, what is the cost price of labor? It's the price of subsistence. That means it's the rent bills, electricity bills, gas, food, buying shoes, glasses, all that. And actually, that's the cost. That's the cost price of labor. That's what we have to give to the person so that they can keep existing tomorrow and the day after and the day after that, so that they can keep coming to work. That's the cost price. And in reality, what happens is that the price of labor goes down like any other commodity until it reaches its cost price. And from that moment on, what happens? From that moment on, you have people who don't work to earn a living, but rather live to work. They become prisoners of work. So when you work and earn, let's say, minimum wage, it's not charity, right? It's not charity, it's that you receive minimum wage and generally you've created value for your employer. The value you've created is greater than the minimum wage. But the difference, how does that work? The difference in the Marxist view is kept by the boss. Not the boss as in the person who manages you day to day, but rather the one who owns and monopolizes the means of production or the one you have to work for. So that's how it works. It works like this. For example, let's say you bring in this value. When you work, you bring in the value of your salary. Let's say we're talking about weekly salary, just to make it simple. Let's say you work on Monday and Tuesday, and in those 2 days, you've already brought in the equivalent of your salary to your employer. And actually, for a lot of people, it's even faster than that. You work at some registers, I don't know, maybe in fast food or something else. You're paid, I don't know, you're paid 15 euros an hour. You could end up making your restaurant owner 15 euros literally in the first 4 minutes. You have 2, 3 customers coming in. That's it. Already they've made your salary, and from there, everything else, you're bringing them profit. So from a Marxist perspective, you're working for free. That means if on Monday and Tuesday, you've already earned your boss your week's salary, right? Well, on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, you're working for them for free. You're creating what's called a surplus value. And this surplus value, what do we do with it in a society? So this question of what we do with the surplus value, who is going to capture it? Will it be redistributed to the workers? Will it be redistributed to society as a whole? Or will it be used to create rents for investment firms that are located on the other side of the world? Well, this question is extremely important because I'm going to tell you something about this question. It's not just about defining who will be rich, who will be poor, who will have a full account, who will have an empty account. It's not even just that. It's a question that will define us as a society, that will define our lives, that will have extremely deep ramifications on the way we live. That's where the power of Marxist analysis lies. It means that it's not just a question of money as people who came before Marx did, like David Ricardo, Adam Smith, or others. It's not just that. This time, it's extremely profound. The way we manage this windfall will define us as a society. And today, when you look at us as a society, you'll see that the choices we've made are choices for which we are paying the consequences. For example, we are in societies in Europe where we will pay a driver, or rather a soccer player, we will buy him for 80 million. His social value is 80 million. While at the same time, in hospitals, there are people dying in the hallways simply because there aren't enough resources for emergencies. You see what I mean? So really, there is this situation that affects our lives much more deeply than just a question of who gets rich or who gets poor. These are very important choices. So what happens is that once we have this part of the week, let's say Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, which is given for free as free labor, as surplus value to the employers, well, we're going to get to another story. The forces of capital want to maximize that part because after a while they ask themselves, why Wednesday, Thursday, Friday? Why not have Tuesday as free value creation for us too? If you look at the capitalistic system we live in, you'll notice that in every way it's addicted to surplus value. It wants more value at any cost. So how does it do that? There are several techniques. Several techniques are used, making you work longer, making you work with more intensity, increasing your productivity in one way or another. So that, for example, let me give you a simple example. People used to work with pens, paper, ledgers, all that. Then computers came along. What did computers do? They increased their productivity. So when they increase productivity, automatically they increase the surplus value. Whenever productivity rises, surplus value also rises automatically. Why? Because it allows you as a worker to work better, to work faster, to generate value more quickly. So if, for example, it used to take you 2 days a week to create your weekly wage, well, there comes a time when you'll create your weekly wage just on the first day. This means this time that you're working 4 days for free. And of course, after that, they'll say, why not do more? Why not use AI? Why not use robots? Why not reduce the number of people? Like I have a factory with 100 people. If I introduce AI, robots, all that, I can fire 90 people and keep only 10 and so on. So always try to maximize productivity. There's something terrible that we're noticing. You can look it up and you'll see the numbers are pretty staggering. We'll see that the system in recent decades, that's where the pressure on the classes comes from, the middle classes and even others. We can't talk about it. If you look, you'll see that we've increased productivity. Productivity has gone up a lot, but wages haven't kept up. That means that today we're able to produce much more than someone could before. In the 1980s, for example, in the 1970s, we produced much more value, but wages have stagnated. So what's happening? What's happening is, for example, there's a capture of value because the forces of money, when they push us through different tools, different mechanisms of changing work, when they push us to create more value, it's not to increase our wages. When you have the slave driver behind you, whipping you to make you work faster, it's not so he can pay you more at the end of the day. It's simply to increase the value he can extract from you. It's like beating a donkey to make it go faster. It's for the cart owner's benefit, not the donkey's. So, as I was saying, what happens is that when you look from the 1960s to today, you'll see, for example, that the average salary of CEOs of companies has skyrocketed. If you compare companies, what was it in terms of multiples? The salary of a CEO, how many times larger is it than the median salary in the company? You'll find, for example, that in the 1960s it was maybe 25 or 30 times higher. Today, it's on average 500 times higher. We're heading towards 500. Today, we even have CEOs who make 7,000 times more than a regular employee. So, what are we doing? We are being pushed by this choice that's actually being imposed on us, whose mechanisms we haven't even dismantled. We're just starting to do that here. Well, what we're doing is that the surplus production and the improvement in our productivity are being used to create a windfall for those at the top. It means it's very simple. As Marx says, the more we grow in number, the more they grow in wealth. And by the way, you notice something, and it's not a coincidence. It was predicted 150 years ago that today we're in a world where we've never had so many humans. Do you agree with me? There have never been so many humans on the planet as there are today. Well, there have never been so many billionaires and trillionaires on the planet either. You see what I mean? Why? Because we've created a system of exploitation. We've created a system that constantly funnels wealth upward. Now, the problem with this system is that it knows no limits. That means the more you give, the more they take from you, the more. 6 months later, they think we need more. So the more they take from you, the more they want. There's no limit to this. There's no limit to this game. And so there comes a time when we find ourselves like we are today on the downward slope of capitalism. That means at first, capitalism could give up a microwave oven, could give up a car, vacations, all that, to give the impression that everything is fine in the best of all worlds and that we are collectively evolving. But that's not its nature. Its true nature isn't that. Its true nature is to take everything. They'll even take your organs if you please. I can tell you about the story of organs. It's not just a joke from me, it's very serious. So what's happening now is that today we are on the downward slope of capitalism. And then it will take everything from us. It will ruin us all. And then we'll end up with no middle class. We'll end up as lumpen proletariat for the majority of people. Lumpen proletariat are people who are completely excluded from the labor market or the economy. These are people who have no economic weight. So more and more people are being excluded. That means they fall into precariousness, fall into the black market, fall into long-term unemployment and all that. And then on the other side, we'll have billionaires and trillionaires. That's it. And that's the choice we're making today. I'm telling you, it's not fixable. It's not something we can just fix like that. And finally, let me say something. I saw the comments saying, yes, we need to go back to more free markets. We need less state intervention and all that. I'm not really into that. I'll tell you why. First of all, a lot of people think that capitalism is a kind of free market system, that capitalism doesn't need the state. That's not true. Capitalism always goes hand in hand with the state. What is the state? I gave you the definition last time. The state is a committee that manages the affairs of the moneyed forces, that manages the affairs of the ruling classes, the affairs of the top 1 in 1,000. It doesn't manage your affairs. Consider this, just a detail in passing. Today, in the United Kingdom, you can get arrested for an English flag. If you put up an English flag, you can get arrested for that. In France, you can get fined for a French flag. Yet, the day they want you to die for their war, for the wars of the ruling classes who control the narrative, you'll die. This time, you have the right to take the French flag and go die for it. They tell you you're dying for France. You're dying for the French flag. In reality, you're not dying for France. You're dying for their sake. You're dying for them. You see what I mean? If they can profit from your life or death through your tribute or money, as they've done for centuries, they'll do it without hesitation. Now, if you're dumb enough to go die for them, to die for their war, all while shouting that you're dying for principles or a country or whatever, well, you've swallowed too much of the ruling class's narrative. You need to detox from that. So as I was saying, there are people who say that we have to move towards liberalism, which is the very natural, deep essence of capitalism. That's what we call capitalism. Why? Salafism, if you will, is a mentality that you can find among certain categories of Islamists, or even for that matter among moderate Muslims, who believe that returning to the sources, going back, if you will, if Islam is not doing well, it's because it hasn't been properly applied. We need to go back to its roots, go back to its sources. And so the more we sink into theocratic systems, that don't work, the more they will say, no, we need to go back to the sources. We need to do even more. You see the idea, we're going to do more. We're going to dig ourselves in deeper and deeper, you see. So capitalist Salafism is precisely a Salafism that says the system we live in is not bad in itself, But on the other hand, it needs to become authentic again. It needs to return to its roots. And that's not something that works. It's something that can be taken apart quite easily. The reality is that the system doesn't need to be reformed, but it needs a real revolution. There you go, my friends. Thank you for listening to this video right here, and feel free to keep asking questions, and we'll see each other in the next one. See you very soon.